Buying a house feels expensive almost everywhere right now, and not just in one country or one city. It's a global pattern. What makes it confusing is that it doesn't behave like a normal product where higher prices automatically bring more supply and fix the problem. Housing behaves more like a slow-moving system where economics, policy, psychology, and finance all interact at the same time. That's why even people with stable jobs and decent incomes often feel like home ownership is drifting further away instead of getting closer. To understand why, you have to stop thinking of housing as just a building you buy and start seeing it as a system shaped by multiple long-term forces. Limited land in the places people actually want to live. At the most basic level, housing is expensive because the most important input, land, is fixed. You can manufacture bricks, steel, cement, glass, and even entire skyscrapers. But you cannot manufacture more land in the exact locations where demand is highest. This matters because housing demand is not evenly distributed. People don't just want a house somewhere, they want homes near, job opportunities, schools and universities, hospitals and infrastructure, transportation systems, safe and stable neighborhoods. As a result, demand concentrates in specific urban zones while supply remains physically limited. That imbalance naturally pushes prices upward over time. Even when cities expand outward, commuting costs, time and convenience keep central areas highly valuable. Urbanization and concentrated demand. Over time, more people move into cities rather than rural areas. This is one of the strongest long-term global trends. Cities offer higher incomes, better services, and more opportunities. But this creates a side effect. Housing demand becomes concentrated in the same limited zones. Even if a country is not growing rapidly in population, its cities can still experience intense pressure because people are continuously moving toward urban centers. So instead of demand being spread across a country, it becomes clustered in a few economic hubs. That clustering is one of the main reasons housing prices in major cities rise much faster than national averages. Construction costs have steadily increased. A home is not just land. It is a combination of materials, labor, energy, and logistics. Over time, all of these inputs tend to rise in cost. Materials like steel, cement, copper, wood, and glass are tied to global supply chains. When global demand increases or energy prices rise, construction costs go up. Labor also becomes more expensive as cities develop. Skilled workers such as electricians, plumbers, and engineers command higher wages in growing economies. Transportation costs add another layer. Even if materials are cheap at origin, moving them across regions or countries adds fuel and logistics costs that fluctuate over time. So even before land prices are considered, the baseline cost of building a home has a long-term upward pressure. The gap between wages and housing prices. One of the most important reasons housing feels unaffordable today is the growing gap between income growth and property price growth. Wages typically increase gradually and relatively slowly. Housing prices, however, often move in cycles driven by credit conditions, investment demand, and market sentiment. Over long periods, this creates a widening gap where homes become more expensive relative to what average incomes can support. This doesn't mean incomes aren't rising. It means housing prices often rise faster, especially in desirable locations. As a result, saving for a down payment becomes increasingly difficult even for middle-income households. Mortgage systems expand buying power and prices. One of the most misunderstood drivers of high housing prices is credit. Mortgages allow people to borrow large amounts of money to purchase homes. This increases access to housing, which is positive in principle. However, it also increases the total amount buyers can collectively pay. When interest rates are low, borrowing becomes cheaper. Buyers can afford larger loans, which increases demand in the housing market. But sellers and developers respond to this increased buying power by raising prices. So instead of making homes more affordable, easy credit often increases prices by expanding demand faster than supply. This is one of the key reasons housing markets tend to rise sharply during low interest rate periods. Housing as an investment asset, not just shelter. A major structural shift in modern economies is that housing is no longer only a basic necessity. It has also become a financial asset. People buy property not just to live in it, but also to generate rental income, preserve wealth, hedge against inflation, speculate on price appreciation. This adds an entire second layer of demand that does not depend on personal housing needs. Now, buyers include not only families looking for homes, but also investors, landlords, real estate funds, and institutions. When an essential good becomes an investment asset, competition increases significantly, and prices tend to rise beyond what pure shelter demand would suggest. Speculation and expectation-driven markets. Housing markets are heavily influenced by expectations about the future. When people believe prices will keep rising, they often rush to buy sooner rather than later. This behavior increases demand in the present, which pushes prices even higher. That price increase then reinforces the original belief. This creates a feedback loop. Rising prices leads to fear of missing out, leads to more buying, leads to even higher prices. At a certain point, buying behavior becomes less about current value and more about expected future value. That is when speculation becomes a major driver of the market. Even cautious buyers often feel pressure to enter the market simply because waiting feels riskier than participating. Government policies and supply constraints. Housing supply is not purely determined by market forces. It is also shaped by government regulations, zoning laws, land use rules, environmental approvals, building codes, and urban planning policies all affect how quickly and where new housing can be built. These rules exist for important reasons such as safety, infrastructure management, and environmental protection. However, they also slow down supply growth. In many cities, it takes years to approve and complete new housing projects. This delay means supply cannot respond quickly to rising demand, allowing prices to stay elevated for longer periods. In some cases, strict zoning also limits the construction of high-density housing, which further restricts supply in high-demand areas. Location value and infrastructure premiums. Not all housing is equal because not all locations are equal. A home located near employment centers, good schools, transport networks, and commercial infrastructure is significantly more valuable than a similar home in a less connected area. This creates what is often called a location premium. As cities develop and infrastructure improves, certain areas become more desirable and prices rise accordingly. Over time, this creates large price differences between regions that may otherwise have similar construction costs. This is why two identical houses can have completely different prices depending on location. Slow adjustment makes housing markets sticky. Unlike financial markets that can adjust instantly, housing markets move slowly. Building homes takes years. Buying and selling homes involves legal processes, financing, inspections, and emotional decisions. People also do not move frequently compared to how often financial assets are traded. Because of this, supply and demand imbalances can persist for long periods without quick correction. Instead of sharp, immediate adjustments, housing markets often experience long cycles of gradual increases followed by slower corrections. This stickiness contributes to prolonged affordability challenges. Inflation and long-term price increases. Over time, general inflation increases the nominal cost of everything, including housing. As currency value changes, Construction materials, land, labor, and services all become more expensive in monetary terms. Even if real affordability remains relatively stable in some cases, the actual price numbers continue to rise over decades. This creates the impression that housing is always becoming more expensive, even though part of that increase reflects broader economic inflation. Wealth concentration and competitive buying power. In many regions, wealth has become increasingly concentrated among higher-income individuals and institutions. These buyers have greater financial flexibility. They can pay higher prices, buy multiple properties, hold assets without selling outbid average buyers. This increases competition in desirable housing markets and pushes prices upward. Over time, housing becomes less about basic access and more about financial competition between different levels of capital. The combined effect, a system under constant pressure. What makes housing expensive is not any single factor, but the interaction of many long-term forces: limited land in high-demand areas, urbanization and population concentration, rising construction and energy costs expanding credit and mortgage systems, investment-driven demand, speculation and expectation cycles, regulatory constraints on supply, slow adjustment mechanisms, inflation and wealth concentration. When these forces combine, housing stops behaving like a simple market for shelter and starts behaving like a complex financial system influenced by economics, policy, and psychology at the same time. Final thought. Housing is expensive today because it exists at the intersection of necessity and investment. Everyone needs it, but not everyone is competing for it for the same reason. That tension between living space and financial asset creates continuous upward pressure on prices in many parts of the world. And because these forces evolve slowly, the challenge is not temporary. It builds over time, shifts unevenly across regions, and affects different groups in very different ways. If this breakdown helped you understand why housing feels so expensive, take a step further and observe your own local market more closely. Look at how fast new housing is being built, who is buying properties in your area, and how prices compare with average incomes over time. And if you found value in this explanation, like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts, especially if housing in your area feels disconnected from reality.